Hi everyone, thank you for joining me. My topic today is the psychoneuroimmunity of stress, diet, and lifestyles in depression. Let me briefly introduce myself. My background is a psychiatrist, working with patients with depression for almost 30 years. I also lead the Mind-Body Interface Research Center, the MBI Lab and Care, working with my team focusing on translational research for better depression care. I mainly use clinical trials, molecular biology, imaging, and recently AI-based technology to investigate the clinical effects and biological mechanism of mind-body interventions, including nutrition, traditional medicine, and lifestyle intervention. I also founded the first depression center in Taiwan to provide the evidence-based integrative treatments. I also have a long research track history in nutritional psychiatry, especially omega-3 in depression. I co-founded the International Society of Nutritional Psychiatry Research and currently the vice president and the editor-in-chief of its official journal called Nutritional Psychiatry. You may be aware of tragic news of suicides among talented people in academia, campus, or entertainment. Because of my profession, friends always ask me, why did these most elite people get depression and choose to take their own life when they seem to be at the top of the world? Well, in fact, clinical depression and suicide are illness and symptoms, not a choice. And according to the recent World Health Organization report, half of world population would have at least one episode of any mental disorders in lifetime, and 1/4 suffer from at least one episode of clinical depression. Therefore, no one is immune to brain disorders such as depression. About depression, people also ask, why do people get depression? Is depression a disease of civilization? Or is depression caused by stress? We often discuss these interesting issues not only in conferences or party conversations, but also in clinical interactions. And recently, I integrate my work from lecture and research and published a paper invited by the current opinions in psychiatry. I focus on evolutionary perspective and the impact of stress, inflammation, nutrition, circadian rhythm, and lifestyles. And today, I'm also going to talk about how our lifestyles and some ancient wisdom may harmonize our inner orchestra and promote mental health. And let me start with evolutionary theory of psychoneuroimmunity. So from the left, in hunter-gatherer era, early evolutionary pressure from threats of pathogens, predators, and enemy resulted in a genetic selection toward inflammation response for fighting infection and healing wounds. And in the middle, showing in traditional environment, we exposed to minimal pathogenic organisms and injuries, which induce regulatory T and B cells, M2 macrophages, as well as the production of anti-inflammation cytokines such as transforming growth factor beta and interleukin-10. And that anti-inflammatory regulation balances the inflammatory bias from genetic selection. But on the right, showing in modern world, prominent chronic psychological challenges replace infectious challenges to activate our old defense mechanisms. Without early anti-inflammatory development, because we are now living in a more sanitized environment, consequently, we become living with low-grade chronic inflammatory and chronic stressful status in modern world. And that partially explains the significant increasing rate of various inflammation-related disorders, including obesity, dyslipidemia, metabolic disorders, and depression. Now let's talk about nutrition. Our team is mainly interested in omega-3, which is probably the most studied nutrient in brain and brain evolution. For example, one interesting article in published review Neuroscience proposed that the excess of shore-based diet high in omega-3 fatty acids had a key role to increase the brain-body mass ratio, also known as encephalization, which makes critical advantage in survival and reproduction when chimpanzees evolved to human. Till now, the interplay between omega-3 diet and the brain is still ongoing. For over the past few centuries, our diet has dramatically shifted from high anti-inflammatory omega-3 to high pro-inflammatory omega-6 ratio, and that is used to explain the dramatic increases of incidence in many chronic medical and mental illnesses. The fact that omega-3 fatty acid is important in depression comes from several lines of evidence, including a famous study showing the negative correlation between fish consumption and the prevalence rate of depression, implying a protective effect of omega-3. And in 2003, we published one of the first randomized control trial to support omega-3's antidepressant effects as compared to placebo. In 2012, we updated a meta-analysis in molecular psychiatry. We found that the antidepressant effect is mainly from EPA, but not DHA. And for your information, that EPA and DHA are two major components of omega-3 fatty acids, with EPA being more anti-inflammatory and DHA being more neuroprotective. And to our surprise, the antidepressant effect from EPA is consistently reported by several independent groups. Therefore, we started to think about the personalized treatment of using omega-3, especially EPA, in inflammation-related depression. But today I don't have time to go to the details. So we found that EPA is promising antidepressant in inflammation-related depression subtypes in our following research. In this part, I want to emphasize diet is important. A huge 30 years clinical study enrolled over 100,000 people in Nature Medicine revealed the best dietary patterns. So eat more fruit, veggies, omega-3, whole grains, nuts, beans, and low-fat diet, and less trans fats, salts, sugar drinks, and ultra-processed junk food. And a good diet help everyone, regardless gender, smokers, physical activity, and those with high BMI. Now let's talk about circadian rhythm. Our story again begins with evolution. As we evolved, our ancestors lived in synchronization with the rising and setting of the sun. We humans' internal clocks finally tuned this nature rhythm, and the scientists who discovered the molecular and cellular mechanism were awarded by 2017 Nobel Prize. I don't have time to talk about the details of our research, so I only like to summarize. Not only depressed patients have circadian rhythm dysfunction, but also the pharmacological or non-pharmacological interventions that regulate circadian functions could also improve depression and mental health. To conclude in this figure we published earlier, in the middle, the chronic inflammation seems to be the common mechanism linking to pathogenesis in common medical and mental disorders in the right. So how do we clinicians learn from our patient about disease prevention and health promotion? I think the answer may always lead us back to stress management, lifestyle, nutrition, and traditional mind-body practices. So this is a take-home message. Move more, eat right, sleep well, and practice anti-inflammation lifestyles. And if possible, pick up your wearable devices, go exercise, practice mindfulness, and take care of your sleep data. And thank you very much for your attention.